Hello everyone. My name's Kate, as Pavel said, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to talk to you about uncertain journeys. I do have a tendency to speak quite fast, so if I am going too fast, then just put up your hand and I'll try and go slower. So before I introduce you to Displacement, Uncertain Journeys, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background on myself. So I graduated with an international relations and modern history degree, and I went straight into work for University of the Arts London, which is one of Europe's largest art and design universities. I know I've got one graduate from LCC, but I wondered if anyone else was a graduate of any of the 6 university colleges. No? Okay. Just you, Veronica. And, oh no. There you go. So I joined University of the Arts London for the first 11 years of my working career, and the first half was looking at international development and recruitment, how we recruit international students to come and do our courses on BA, Masters or PhD. And then for the last 5 years, I was looking at live projects, which is something that universities in the UK have started to develop, where you get a real life project rather than a theoretical one. So you get a live client with a live brief. And Hannah, who is founder of Displacement Uncertain Journeys, came to us to do a PhD in this exact topic. And she said to us, I want to use art and design to lobby policymakers. And we were just like, how exciting is that? Actually, art and design to have a real impact on policymakers and potentially change international law. So we thought it was a great idea. And in 2015, we joined the Nansen Initiative, which was looking at a protection agenda for people who were displaced through climate and natural disasters. So I thought it would probably be quite important to explain what displacement was, and you'll have to forgive me because I am not an expert. Hannah is the expert in international law, so I have a good set of notes to tell you about displacement. I wondered if anyone had ever heard the word displacement before, or climate refugee. Okay, so each year, approximately 24 million people are forcibly displaced by climate and natural disasters. So on this map, you can see the orange is related to people who are displaced by conflict, and the blue is people who are displaced by natural disasters and climate. And the bigger circles represent up to 3 million people who are displaced in that area. So you can see it's a massive problem, and latest scientific evidence indicates that the more intense and more frequent these will become in the near future because of climate. The world has always had natural disasters, but one difference that climate makes is often there's going to be large amounts of land that are now susceptible to sea rise and will become uninhabitable, and it may be that whole countries will be consumed by the sea. So, what is a disaster? The UN describes disasters as situations when an affected community or society lacks the capacity to withstand the impacts of, in this case, natural hazards like floods, earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis, and tropical storms. So, we could have a natural hazard in a developed country. So, for example, a wealthy, developed city in Europe that has a good infrastructure and a good drainage system and money to prepare people for disaster could have a deluge of rain, and it would be fine because the rain would be taken away. But if you have a developing country with relatively poor infrastructure, you could have the same deluge of rain, but it would produce something like this. And so people are forced to displace themselves. They're forced to move away from their houses. So there are calls to protect the rights of climate refugees, people who are forcibly displaced from their house, like flooding in Bangladesh or drought in Somalia. But the interesting point is that that status doesn't exist in international law. So So, under the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol, the legal status of a refugee is granted to people who face a well-founded fear of persecution on one or more of the following grounds: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or a political opinion. So that doesn't cover people who are displaced by climate or natural disaster. Generally, people who are fleeing persecution are fleeing their own government. These people are fleeing a government who cannot deal with the impact of a natural disaster. So how do we know when someone is displaced rather than migrating? Generally, the term for people who is displaced, they don't have a choice. They have to move. They aren't able to live in their current environment. And people who migrate, it's generally a voluntary activity, and they have another viable action to go, another viable opportunity to go to. I think it's important to note that disasters don't happen just in developing countries. So a good example is Hurricane Katrina that devastated the United States in 2013. And this is an image of the Northeast Japan earthquake and tsunami of 2011, which killed 16,000 people and displaced hundreds of thousands of people from the coastal region of Iwate. And Japan is actually still recovering. There are still hundreds of people who are in temporary housing, still 8 years after the tsunami. And this just indicates the level of devastation that a natural disaster can cause. So, understandably, governments are seeking options to prevent situations like this. And unfortunately, they can't ignore it because disaster displacement will be one of the key challenges of the 21st century. So this is where we come in, and we are a collaboration with the Platform on Disaster Displacement, and it was previously the Nansen Initiative. So the Platform on Disaster Displacement is a state-led process that aims to implement the recommendations of the Nansen Initiative, which were endorsed by 109 governments in 2015. It addresses key challenges posed by disaster displacement. So, what do we do? So displacement contributes and amplifies to the work of the Platform on Disaster Displacement through a cultural program that supports and collects artistic and creative responses to people who have been displaced through climate or disaster. It's devised as an integrated cultural program on disaster displacement, and it uses art and art methodologies to enhance the work of PPDD and its work with local, national and international governments. So we design a program that carefully engages with governmental organizations and policymakers, and we also take it out to the public, and we have public engagement. So this is an example of us integrating into the visual language of the conference. We produce information on all the artwork on display, but we also assist in the creation of the info packs and the visual imagery that goes with it. We have art interventions. I'll talk about them later, but this is Atlantic Pacific, and this is a specifically designed tsunami rescue boat. They design boats for various sea rescue situations, and this one has actually gone to Japan to help in their recovery. We do tabletoppers, much like the artwork outside. It's a point of reference to start a discussion. People are eating lunch. They're probably tired from listening to lots of statistical data. There's a nice picture on the table, and it starts a conversation with the person next to you. We do interactive events. I'll talk a bit about Lucy later. This is Lucy at the 2015 Nansen Initiative sharing her global passport. You're not part of a country, you're part of the world. It's always helpful to have some nice artwork when you've got press about. This makes it easier for some of the complex ideas in policy making to be clearly articulated to the general public, and it's always great to engage press in the artwork, which makes it a more interesting news item. We also get a space to speak at the conference, which is fantastic. We get to address 109 governments who are there to talk about displaced people, and we tell them about the artwork, about the process of the artwork, and generally about the topics that the art is covering. We also do outreach into the local community. So this is a Sunday when we invited the public to come and look at the artwork and also have panel discussions with the artists, but also some lawyers and some policymakers to get a really interesting discussion going with the wider population of Geneva. And to us, education is really important. So these are 6 students from MA Curations and Collections from University of the Arts London. They came with us to the Nansen Initiative. They went to the conference, which was incredibly intimidating for kind of 19-year-olds, but they helped us install all the artwork, and they were ambassadors for the project. So you can go to our website and you can see all of the artists that we've selected. We generally select based on the content of their research. We're around displaced people. We are open to suggestions, so if anyone is interested in this or makes work around it, then please do contact us. We're always looking for new artists to join us. So now the fun bit, the art. I'm going to talk about 4 artists that we represent at Displacement Uncertain Journeys. I wondered if the art is meant to engage people and get them to talk about maybe their ideas and thoughts around displaced people, and I wondered if anyone had any comments about Chris's piece. So for anyone who is maybe naval or air, this is semaphore, and this semaphore indicates error. And so this picture was taken on the coastline of the tsunami of 2011. It is indicating error. And this is Chris Wainwright. He was one of the founders of Displacement. He sadly died last year. And he was an artist, a teacher, a lecturer, and an activist for climate change. And this piece of work represents to somewhat the error of natural disaster, but also the error of human nature in terms of the impact of the tsunami of 2011. There were lots of human errors that led to so many people being killed, as well as the fact of 7 massive waves. This is Pause. When we went to Japan, the community were understandably in such a state of shock that everything seemed to have stopped. They were pausing. How do we rebuild a community that has been completely devastated? Nothing was left. No roads, no buildings, no hospitals, nothing. And so I thought this was a really interesting piece that Chris did about pausing in a disaster and working out what is the best way to recover. This is We Are All Stars. This is the local community who were engaged in the project and were asked to participate. And one of the stories that Chris heard when he was there was that the sky was really clear that night that the tsunami came. And a lot of people have suggested that everyone who died went up to heaven and they were stars. And so as part of a therapeutic activity, Chris got them to make all-star shapes on the bay of Nabama, which is where the tsunami struck. So this is Lucy Otter. She has some great Antarctic pieces. So in 2007, Lucy and George Otter founded their ephemeral Antarctic village, and each of these tents are hand-stitched by a traditional tent maker made up of flags and also items found from places and sewn into the fabric of the tent, giving them a story. This is the International Antarctica Passport Office, where you can collect your global passport. So you then become a citizen of the world rather than a citizen of a country. And in 2008, the first printed edition of the Antarctica World Passport was produced, and it's been distributed worldwide, although not legal tender, so please don't try to use it to get through passport control. They've been celebrated for producing a major socially engaging, participative art project. This is Lars Young. He is an American artist, but of Afghani and Polish descent. And these photos are really great. So these are people trying to undertake daily activities immersed in water. So this lady is trying to carry fruit. This person is trying to clean. And he staged it in, this is in Toronto, but he also staged it in Times Square for people to perhaps start the discussion about what if we do have flooding? How am I going to go about my daily life? It looks quite fun, but it has a serious undertone of questioning people, what if? So this is Atlantic Pacific, so we don't always go for contemporary art pieces, we go for practical design. People who are designing for disaster, which is also a movement in the UK that people are becoming even more concerned with. So this was the boat that was specifically designed for tsunami rescue. It is small enough to, with 45 minutes warning, to get out past the wave, so it goes over it. And the plan is that you clean up from behind. So the difficulty with the Japanese tsunami is that quite a few people were washed out, and they'd survived being washed out, but they had nothing to go and get them because all the boats had been washed inland. And Atlantic Pacific also came up with an ingenious solution. So there is nothing in northern Japan. This is a rebuilt port, but they have no houses. Well, they do now, but they didn't then. And so this is a lifeboat in a box. It's a 40-foot shipping container that can be delivered anywhere in the world. You can open the door and you will have a fully operational lifeboat service. So in places that are at risk of flooding or in places that are at risk of tsunami, their goal is to ship one of these there and train local people, which is what they did in Japan. This is the Japanese crew. So, in conclusion, just turn my page. I think art is always interesting in terms of how you develop a conversation. And I think policymakers are constantly dealing with statistics and data. How do you get them to be emotional about a decision without having to kind of show them really graphic, awful images of people struggling and children dying? And I think this way, it's a way to generate new ideas. It's a way for them to have a conversation about a specific issue and perhaps come up with a different solution to the one that they first thought. It's also less stressful in terms of looking at devastating photos, which has its impact, but sometimes can close people off. So the plan was at Nansen that these people who were there, would go home and discuss what they'd seen. We were pretty successful in terms of 109 governments accepted the protection agenda, which I think was the hard work of the Nansen Initiative, but we hope that the artwork had some form of influence on their decision. And I hope that you guys wearing your badges will have had some form of impact from this discussion, whether you go home and maybe look up interesting things about people who are displaced, or maybe your next design will be something concerned with disaster displacement or ways to deal with disaster. Be great. We're not really sure of the impact yet that art has on policy making, but there are several examples of where art and design and creative thinking have had a positive impact. And one of those is the Blue Planet effect, which I'm not sure, have you guys watched Blue Planet? 2? Some of you. Okay. So when they were filming Blue Planet 1, which was released in the UK, they realised that there was a massive problem with plastic in the ocean, and so they decided to commission Blue Planet 2, which was the most watched TV programme in the UK in 2017, and has had a massive impact on the UK and the behaviour of the people in the UK. So, as well as making policymakers comment on the use of plastic, we've also had proposed bans on plastic cotton buds, straws and drink stirrers in the UK, and you're now very unlikely to find a plastic straw in London. It's all paper. And so this is the kind of impact that we could have through creative design, creative art, lobbying the general public who will lobby policymakers to make a better world. Oh no. I haven't got my last slide. My last slide was going to say thank you, and also the list of websites, but that we don't have a book that we can launch today. I'm very sorry. But yeah, thank you very much.